Hi everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Today, we're going to get a kick or head start on dinner tonight. We're going to be doing a corned beef dinner with some discard focaccia. And so, corned beef, if you've never made it before, we're going to be doing it in our Dutch oven in the oven, and it needs about 3 or so hours to cook. Here is my my beautiful one. I can't speak. But this is my beautiful, huge corned beef roast. This is probably much bigger than the average American family would eat, but we are going to be feeding 9 people tonight. So this large, lovely corned beef brisket, we're going to cook in our Dutch oven for later, but it does take about 3 or so hours to cook. So we're going to pop that in. But first, we're going to start on our focaccia dough using some sourdough discard. It's not a true sourdough, so we're going to be using some yeast in it, but we will be using a good amount of sourdough discard for it. So let's start off. I'm going to be using my scale because I do love to use my scale when I am making like breads. We're going to start off with 350 grams of warm water. Make sure your water's warm so that our yeast can bloom. So I'm just going to pour it in here. That's about 1.5 cups. But again, I like to use my scale to be exact. So we want 350 grams of warm water. Ooh, perfect. Well, almost 352. We're good. Okay, turn my scale off. Then we're going to be adding a tablespoon of active dry yeast for our discard or focaccia bread. So again, not a true sourdough. It has sourdough discard in it, but we want a little bit of yeast to give it that little pop. So we're going to sprinkle this all the way around the water. I'm like kind of making a nice layer of the yeast on top. And then we are going to add in our salt. We want a tablespoon of salt as well. Sprinkle that over the top. And then to help with our blooming, we are going to use a tablespoon of honey, but I'm just going to drizzle it over because honey is super sticky and it's hard to pour in a measuring thing and out. So we want just about a tablespoon, but I'm just going to give it a quick drizzle. Come back here. And now I'm just going to use my dough whisk and I'm going to give it a nice stir. The honey is going to help the yeast activate and get blooming. So we're going to let this sit for a hot minute until we have a nice frothiness on it. And that's essentially the bloom of the active dry yeast. It's if you don't know much about yeast, it's kept in the refrigerator to keep the organisms dormant, and then you put it in warm water and you give it a little sugar, which is the honey, and it activates it up again. Okay, so here is our big hunkin roast. This is there. We're going to place the fat side down on the bottom of the pan. So I'm using my really big Dutch oven here because it is quite a long roast. This is believe a 13.25 quart Dutch oven. It's massive and huge. And we are going to sprinkle over some of the seasonings that come with the corned beef. So I'm just going to cut this top off. And I'm going to sprinkle it. And I'm just going to coat it on top of the meat. It has, it looks like mustard seed, fennel, maybe cloves, bay leaves in there. I never actually looked at what it is, but you got to put it on there. It adds delicious seasoning. If you also never had corned beef before, corned beef, it's corned, not like a corn, but it is actually just salt brined brisket. So it's a way that they use to preserve the meat by putting it in like a saltwater brine. So it's a very salty meat, which is why we're going to be covering it with some water in just a second. But I like to add a bit of onion to our things. I had a bit of a white onion left over, and I'm not going to be using it this week. So I figured, this will be fine to go into our corned beef brine. So I'm just going to do some large chops because this is really just to add a little bit of seasoning. And I'm going to place it on my open areas on both sides of the brisket. Here we go. And I'm just going to take this over to my sink and give my hands a quick wash. Okay, so Now I'm going to add, this mixture does have some crushed up bay leaves, but I like to add a little bit extra because I do love the flavor bay leaves give. So I'm going to put one on each side of my onion. And then we're going to come back with some water. I'm going to use the rest of this water. We want to fill up the water to where it's the top of the brisket. I don't want it overflowing the brisket because the brisket will actually bring out some natural juices. So just enough to cover up the sides of it. So let me fill this up here. And the reason you do this is because corned beef is a very salty meat. And so you need a little bit of liquid to cook out the saltiness. So I'm going to just fill it up around. Give it a little on the top and then bring it over here. So, and perfect. So you see how my whole meat isn't completely submerged, but it is just the top of it is sticking out, which is what we want because it's going to bring in some natural juices and everything and whatnot. Okay, let's go pop this guy in the oven. I will tell you, this cast iron weighs a ton. So we've already got a heavy brisket in, and I think this pot weighs at least 25 pounds. This is my chili cooking pot, but it's also my brisket one. Okay, I have my oven preheated to 350 degrees. Put it in there. Whew, it's like a workout. Thing is heavy. Love the pot though. I would not buy it for full price because that thing is really expensive, but I got it at a going out of business sale for a Le Creuset store. So I got it for 25% of the original cost, and it was still like $175. So it's an expensive pot. But let's get back to our things. I'm going to carefully move this off. You can see my yeast is starting to foam. We're going to let it foam a little bit more, but while it's doing that, we're going to measure out our flour. So we need 500 grams of bread flour. Now, you can use all-purpose flour if you want to. It's going to give yourself a bit of a crumblier focaccia, which is okay. That's a bread that can take the crumb, but I'm going to use bread flour. If I have enough, I might have to put in a little bit of all-purpose flour, but bread flour is the best because it has a higher gluten content. And we need 500 grams of flour, which is between 3.5 and 4 cups. You know, it just depends. I like to use my scale because you never know if there's an air pocket in your, scoop, or if you've packed it in, it can really, vary. So I had 372 grams of bread flour. And so I'm just going to use a little bit of all-purpose flour to make up the difference, which won't have too much of an impact. I'm still going to have the good gluten content in there. Let's see. There we go. 500 grams of our flour. Perfect. Let me turn this off. And here you can see we've got it nice and starting to get foamy, which is perfect. We've got it activating. If you are using yeast and you have put it in a warm bath with some sugar and it is not foamed, it means your yeast is dead, which can happen if you have an old yeast or if it was not stored in the fridge or just not kept right. Like once you pop it open, you've got to keep it in the fridge. Then you just need to go out and buy new ones because your bread just won't rise well. Now to this, we're going to add some sourdough discard. So we need, it's 250 grams of sourdough discard. So let me get my scale back over here. We're going to put it on there and tar it out. So as I said, this is not a true sourdough bread. You're using some yeast in it, but we're going to have all of the good probiotics from a sourdough using the discard and whatnot. And it will give a little bit of the fermentation process. We want 250 grams of this. So I'm going to use a little bit from this jar and a little bit from my other jar that way. And then I can feed my discard. But I don't want to take too much that I don't have enough to feed it well. So I've got about 175 grams in there. And then I'm going to use a little bit from this jar. I'm going to give it a good stir because a lot of times during the kind of fermentation process, a little liquid can go up. That's called like the hooch. But I'm just going to stir it right back in. Almost there. Okay, perfect. We've got 250 grams of sourdough discard. I had fed this within the day. As long as it's fed within a couple of days, it's good. If you've just taken it out of the fridge and it's been in there for a while, it probably won't work as well. Okay, and I'm going to mix this up in 1 second, but we're going to add in 1 tablespoon of oil. And this is the base of our focaccia. We're going to add more oil later when we do our topping and our seasonings, but this is just the base. Really simple if you think about it. 1 tablespoon of yeast, 1 tablespoon of oil, 1 tablespoon of salt, 1 tablespoon of honey, makes it nicer. So we're going to use our dough whisk, and I'm just going to make sure our sourdough and our yeast all get mixed together. That way when we incorporate it into our flour, it will work. It will be nice and evenly distributed. There we go. Perfect. And I guess for those of you who don't know what a focaccia is like bread that you bake on a sheet pan, and it's thin and like long. And a lot of times they have like decorative, vegetables and herbs are pressed into it to make a cool little decoration. But it has a nice crunch on it because it's covered in oil with it. And it's just a really delicious bread. But it's one that you can make. It's not a one that requires a lot of rise time or a lot of kneading. Here we go. So I'm going to use my dough whisk, and we're going to whisk all of this together. And your focaccia the dough is going to start out a little bit sticky, just like when you are doing a sourdough loaf. But for the next hour to 2 hours, I'm going to be doing a fold and stretch, just like a typical sourdough loaf, to really bring out the gluten and the elasticity of it. And then what we'll do is you let it rise a little bit, and then you kind of bring it out and you put it in a big pan and stretch it, and then you'll let it rise again and for about an hour. And that's when you come through and you poke it, and then you cover it with your oil and your seasonings and bake it. Okay. So here we've got it all mixed up with our dough hook. It's a little bit sticky. My trick for working with a sticky dough is just grab a little bit of flour on your hands, because I know a lot of people say, oh, my sourdough is too sticky. It's sticky in the beginning because the flour hasn't completely hydrated yet. And this dough is going to be like a higher hydration dough. So just cover your hands with a little bit of flour, and then you're just going to pull and stretch and fold and stretch. And we're just going to do this, a little bit, and then we'll wait 15 minutes again, and we'll do the fold and stretch. And you do it every 15 minutes for the next hour, hour and a half, until you've gotten several good folds and stretches. And then you'll let it proof, which is going to allow it to rise up for about an hour. Then we'll stretch it out into our pan form, and we'll let it proof again for an hour, and then that's when I'm finishing. But we will finish up our focaccia when we stream later. Our roast and everything needs to cook for a couple of hours, so we will probably get back on around 5:30 for the rest of 5:30 Central Time for those not in my time zone, but 5:30 Central Time to do the rest of dinner prep for tonight, because we're going to have our corned beef roast, and then we're going to do some roasted root vegetables, a kind of Irish cheese scalloped potato, and some fried Brussels sprouts. So kind of a little bougier version of fried cabbage. Well, guys, thank you for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and don't forget to join us back at 5:30 Central Time for the rest of our dinner prep for tonight. Thanks.